Today we're going to be taking a look at the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System as part of the renal series. To start this topic, we first have to understand the basic control of blood pressure within the body. When we have a sudden decline in blood volume or blood pressure, this triggers different types of receptors to become active. For example, we have receptors in the carotid arteries known as carotid baroreceptors, and when these detect a drop in blood pressure, they activate the sympathetic nervous system to try and return it back to normal. At the same time, we also have cells within the kidneys known as juxtaglomerular cells, and when these detect a drop in blood pressure, they activate the Renin-Angiotensin-Aldosterone System, or the RAAS system. And we're going to be looking at the RAAS system in particular in this video. The RAAS pathway begins with a substance known as angiotensinogen, and this is converted into angiotensin 1 via an enzyme known as renin, which is produced in the kidneys. Angiotensin 1 is then converted into angiotensin 2 via a different enzyme known as ACE, or angiotensin converting enzyme, which is secreted by the lungs. Angiotensin 2 is the key hormone in this pathway, and it activates different mechanisms in an attempt to increase blood pressure. For example, it leads to increased vasoconstriction, it activates aldosterone, and it activates anti-diuretic hormone. And we're going to be talking about each of these changes individually. Starting with vasoconstriction, we know that blood vessels are composed of different cell types, but one of these cell types in particular are the smooth muscle cells which line the endothelium, particularly of arteries and arterioles. When angiotensin 2 binds to these smooth muscle cells, it triggers a sudden influx of calcium ions into the cells. As a consequence, we get quite strong contraction of the smooth muscle cells, which results in the blood vessels becoming narrower compared to usual. The reason why this narrowing effect is so useful is because it helps to push a small volume of blood into a smaller volume of space, and as a result of this we get an increased blood pressure. To summarize this effect, vasoconstriction helps to increase vascular resistance and subsequently increase the blood pressure. Let's now take a look at the second mechanism of the RAAS pathway, which involves increasing aldosterone activation. Aldosterone is a hormone which is produced by the adrenal glands, and more specifically, the zona glomerulosa of the adrenal glands. And angiotensin 2 can basically help to activate more aldosterone production from the adrenals. Aldosterone then acts on different cells of the kidneys, such as the distal convoluted tubule cells and the collecting ducts, to exhibit its effects. The main way that aldosterone acts is by influencing the reabsorption and excretion of particular molecules and electrolytes. For example, aldosterone increases the reabsorption of sodium from the renal ducts into the blood. As the sodium ions move across, they also drag water molecules with them due to the effects of osmosis. Aldosterone also increases potassium excretion, so more potassium ions move from the blood into the renal ducts to be excreted into the urine. From the diagram, you can see that the end result involves more sodium and water in the blood, and this helps to increase blood pressure. Let's now take a look at the third and final effect of the RAAS pathway, which is to increase anti-diuretic hormone activation. ADH is produced in the hypothalamus and is then secreted into the blood via the posterior pituitary gland. Angiotensin 2 basically helps to drive both the production and the release of ADH, and the hormone then acts on the collecting ducts of the kidneys to exhibit its effects. To illustrate this, ADH binds to its receptors on the collecting ducts, which triggers aquaporin 2 channels to fuse with the cell surface membrane. Water is then reabsorbed from the filtrate back into the collecting ducts via these aquaporin 2 channels, and eventually back into the blood via channels on the basolateral side of the membrane. Just like in the case of aldosterone, you can see that the net effect is therefore to increase water reabsorption, which helps to drive an increase in blood pressure. Although the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system is highly useful at dealing with sudden drops in blood pressure, it can be detrimental in conditions such as heart failure and hypertension, as the system seems to go into overdrive. Medications have been designed to target different parts of the RAAS pathway. So for example, we have ACE inhibitors, which block the conversion of angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. We also have angiotensin receptor blockers, or ARBs, which help to inhibit the effects of angiotensin 2 directly. The main goal of these medications is to ensure that the blood pressure remains within a suitable range. To finish off, we have a summary slide here which outlines everything I've gone through in the video. I hope you found this helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.